The recent leadership change in Iran has become one of the most significant political developments in the Middle East. After the death of Iran's longtime supreme leader, power quickly shifted to Mojtaba Khamenei, a figure who had long been discussed within political circles as a potential successor. For decades, the position of supreme leader had been held by Ali Khamenei, who played a central role in shaping Iran's domestic policies and its approach to international relations. His leadership defined Iran's stance toward Western powers, particularly the United States and Israel, both of which Iran has viewed as strategic rivals for many years. With the sudden change in leadership, many analysts began questioning whether Iran's policies would shift or continue along the same path established over the past several decades. Mojtaba Khamenei had previously remained largely behind the scenes in Iran's political and religious structure, rarely appearing in international headlines. However, within Iran's internal power networks, especially among senior clerics and members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, he was believed to hold significant influence long before formally assuming leadership. His appointment, therefore, did not come entirely as a surprise to political observers who closely follow Iranian politics, but it still marked a historic moment for the country. The role of supreme leader in Iran is extremely powerful. Unlike presidents or prime ministers in many countries, the supreme leader controls key elements of the state, including the military, intelligence agencies, and major strategic decisions related to foreign policy. This means that the leadership transition immediately drew global attention, because any change in that position could potentially reshape how, in his first public address after assuming power, Mojtaba Khamenei delivered a message that immediately captured the attention of governments and analysts around the world. His speech focused heavily on the idea of resistance and retaliation, particularly in response to the recent military actions that Iran believes were carried out by United States and Israel. In his remarks, he stated that Iran would not forget the attacks and that those responsible would eventually face consequences. This statement was widely interpreted as a clear signal that Iran's leadership intends to respond strategically and possibly militarily in the future. The promise of revenge has deep roots in Iran's political narrative, especially when the country believes its sovereignty or leadership has been targeted. For many years, Iranian leaders have framed conflicts with foreign powers as part of a larger struggle for independence and national dignity. Mojtaba Khamenei's statements appeared to follow that same pattern, emphasizing that Iran would not allow outside powers to determine its future or weaken its position in the region. By using strong language about retaliation, he aimed to send a message not only to foreign governments, but also to domestic audiences who expect firm leadership during times of crisis. Within Iran, such declarations often serve several purposes. First, they reassure supporters of the government that the leadership remains strong and determined despite external pressure. Second, they signal to military forces and allied groups in the region that Iran intends to maintain its strategy of resistance. Organizations and allied militias across the Middle East have historically viewed Iran as a key supporter, and statements from the supreme leader often guide their political and military positions. At the same time, the international community carefully analyzes every word from Iran's leadership, because statements about revenge can have serious geopolitical implications. Governments across the Middle East, Europe, and Asia closely monitor whether such rhetoric might translate into direct military action or proxy conflicts. Intelligence agencies and diplomatic officials try to determine whether the statements represent immediate plans or long-term strategic messaging designed to deter future attacks. Another important aspect of this declaration is its psychological impact. When a new leader enters power during a time of conflict, the first public message often sets the tone for their leadership style. By promising revenge and emphasizing resistance, Mojtaba Khamenei established himself as a leader who intends to continue the confrontational posture that has characterized Iran's relationship with Washington and Tel Aviv for decades. His speech suggested that Iran's broader strategy, supporting regional allies, maintaining strong missile capabilities, and responding firmly to perceived aggression, would likely remain central to the country's policies under his leadership. In recent weeks, tensions across the Middle East have intensified dramatically, as military actions and political rhetoric continue to escalate between Iran, Israel, and the United States. What began as targeted military operations quickly developed into a broader regional confrontation, raising concerns among global leaders and security analysts about the possibility of a prolonged conflict. Reports of missile launches, drone strikes, and heightened military readiness have become increasingly common, signaling that the situation is moving beyond isolated incidents and toward a more sustained period of instability. The escalation has involved a variety of military activities across different parts of the region. Israel has continued to strengthen its air defense systems and maintain high alert levels along its borders, while Iran has demonstrated its missile and drone capabilities through military exercises and strategic deployments. At the same time, the United States has reinforced several of its military bases throughout the Middle East, deploying additional defensive systems and personnel to ensure the safety of American forces stationed in the region. These movements are closely monitored by intelligence agencies and defense analysts who are trying to assess whether the current situation could evolve into direct, large-scale confrontations. Another factor contributing to the escalation is the involvement of allied groups and regional partners. Various armed groups across the Middle East have historically maintained ties with Iran and often respond when tensions between Iran and its rivals increase. When conflicts intensify, these groups sometimes launch attacks or carry out operations that further complicate the security situation. As a result, the conflict is no longer limited to a single battlefield, but spreads across multiple countries and territories, making it more difficult to control or predict. Diplomatic relations have also become increasingly strained as governments issue warnings, condemnations, and statements supporting their respective allies. International organizations and foreign ministries have been working to reduce tensions through negotiations and emergency discussions, but progress has been slow due to deep political disagreements and security concerns. Many countries fear that even a small miscalculation or unexpected military incident could rapidly trigger a wider confrontation involving multiple nations. Economic and social effects are also beginning to appear as the conflict escalates. Financial markets closely linked to energy resources have shown signs of volatility because the Middle East plays a critical role in global oil production and transportation. Investors and energy companies are watching the situation carefully, knowing that prolonged instability could disrupt supply chains and influence global energy prices. Meanwhile, civilians across the region face growing uncertainty as governments prepare for possible emergencies and strengthen security measures in major cities and strategic locations. One of the most critical strategic factors in the current tensions is the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway sits between Iran and Oman, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and ultimately the open ocean. Despite its relatively small size, it plays an enormous role in the global economy because a significant portion of the world's oil shipments pass through this route every single day. Tankers carrying crude oil and natural gas from Gulf countries must travel through this narrow corridor to reach international markets in Asia, Europe, and other regions. Because of its location, the Strait of Hormuz has long been considered one of the most strategically sensitive maritime chokepoints in the world. Any disruption to traffic in this area can immediately affect global energy supplies and international trade. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar rely heavily on this passage to export their oil and gas to the rest of the world. Because so many major energy producers depend on the same narrow route, even a temporary closure or military confrontation in the area could disrupt the flow of millions of barrels of oil per day. Iran's geographic position along the northern side of the strait gives it significant influence over the waterway. Over the years, Iranian officials have repeatedly stated that if the country faces serious threats or economic pressure, it could consider restricting or controlling shipping in the area. This possibility has been a major concern for international policymakers and energy markets because the closure of such a vital route could trigger sudden increases in oil prices and widespread economic uncertainty. Naval forces from several countries, including the United States, regularly patrol the region to ensure that commercial vessels can travel safely through the strait. Military tensions in the surrounding waters have occurred many times in the past. Naval exercises, patrol boats, surveillance aircraft, and missile systems are frequently present in the region, reflecting the strategic importance of maintaining control over maritime traffic. When political tensions rise in the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz often becomes a focal point of international attention because it represents both a potential pressure point and a critical global lifeline for energy transportation. Ships moving through the waterway must navigate narrow lanes designed to prevent collisions, which means even minor disruptions can quickly slow down or halt the flow of shipping traffic. Energy analysts and global markets closely monitor developments around the strait, because changes in security conditions there can influence everything from fuel prices to transportation costs around the world. Governments and international organizations often emphasize the need to keep the waterway open and secure, recognizing that stability in this region is essential not only for Middle Eastern countries, but for the entire global economy. The strategic importance of this narrow maritime passage continues to make it one of the most closely watched locations whenever geopolitical tensions rise in the region. The ongoing tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States are not limited to regional politics alone. They carry significant consequences for the global community. Conflicts in the Middle East have historically influenced international security, economic stability, and diplomatic relations, and the current situation is no exception. Because the region sits at the crossroads of major energy routes and strategic alliances, any escalation quickly becomes a matter of global concern. One of the most immediate impacts of rising tensions is seen in the global energy market. The Middle East produces a large share of the world's oil and natural gas, and disruptions in this region can rapidly affect global supply chains. When military tensions increase, energy markets often react with volatility as traders anticipate possible interruptions in production or transportation. Even the possibility of conflict near key shipping routes can push oil prices higher, which in turn affects transportation costs, manufacturing industries, and consumer prices across many countries. International diplomacy is also deeply affected by such conflicts. Governments around the world must decide how to respond, whether through alliances, sanctions, mediation efforts, or humanitarian support. Many countries maintain strategic partnerships with either the United States or regional actors in the Middle East, which means their political positions can become increasingly complex during times of conflict. Diplomatic discussions often take place within international organizations such as the United Nations, where member states debate possible resolutions, ceasefire proposals, or peacekeeping initiatives aimed at reducing tensions. Military alliances also come into focus during periods of heightened conflict. The presence of American military bases across several Middle Eastern countries means that any escalation involving Iran could potentially affect not only U.S. forces, but also allied nations cooperating in regional security arrangements. Defense strategies are reviewed, air defense systems are strengthened, and military forces may be placed on higher alert levels to prepare for potential threats. These precautionary measures highlight how a regional confrontation can quickly expand into a matter of international security planning. The economic impact extends beyond energy markets as well. Financial markets around the world often respond to geopolitical uncertainty with increased caution. Investors may shift funds towards safer assets, companies might delay major investments, and international trade routes could face new risks if maritime security becomes uncertain. Airlines sometimes reroute flights away from conflict zones, shipping companies adjust their routes, and global supply chains experience delays that can ripple through multiple industries. Humanitarian concerns also become a major issue when conflicts escalate. Civilians living in areas affected by political instability often face displacement, economic hardship, and disruptions to essential services. International aid organizations monitor the situation closely and prepare emergency assistance programs if conditions worsen. Governments and humanitarian groups may coordinate efforts to support affected populations, provide medical assistance, and ensure that basic necessities such as food, water, and shelter remain accessible. At the same time, global media coverage intensifies as journalists, analysts, and policy experts examine every development in the conflict. News networks and research institutions analyze military movements, diplomatic statements, and economic signals in order to understand the broader implications for international stability. This continuous monitoring reflects the widespread recognition that events in the Middle East rarely remain confined to a single region, but often influence political and economic dynamics across the entire world. As tensions continue to rise between Iran, Israel, and the United States, one of the biggest concerns among global leaders and analysts is the uncertainty surrounding what might happen next. Conflicts involving powerful states and complex regional alliances often evolve in unpredictable ways. Small incidents, miscommunications, or unexpected military actions can quickly change the direction of events and create situations that are difficult to control. Because of this unpredictability, governments around the world are closely monitoring developments and preparing for multiple possible scenarios. One possible path involves continued military escalation. If retaliatory attacks continue between the parties involved, the situation could gradually expand beyond isolated strikes and turn into a prolonged confrontation. Military planners in different countries constantly evaluate how such escalation could affect regional security, especially considering the presence of advanced missile systems, drone technology, cyber warfare capabilities, and naval forces throughout the Middle East. Each side maintains defensive and offensive capabilities that could significantly influence the balance of power if a wider conflict were to occur. Another possibility is the involvement of additional regional actors. The Middle East contains a network of alliances, rivalries, and strategic partnerships that can draw multiple countries into the same conflict. If tensions continue to rise, other states in the region may feel pressure to support their allies either politically, economically, or militarily. This kind of chain reaction has occurred in previous conflicts throughout history, where disputes between a few nations eventually expanded into broader regional struggles. Diplomatic efforts also remain an important factor in shaping the future of the crisis. Governments and international organizations often attempt to prevent conflicts from escalating further by encouraging negotiations, ceasefire agreements, or mediation talks. Institutions such as the United Nations frequently play a role in facilitating discussions between opposing sides. Diplomatic channels, even during periods of high tension, provide opportunities for leaders to reduce misunderstandings and explore peaceful solutions. Economic pressures could also influence the decisions made by political leaders. Sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial measures are sometimes used by countries to discourage further military escalation. Such economic tools can affect national economies, energy markets, and international trade relationships, creating incentives for governments to reconsider aggressive strategies. At the same time, domestic public opinion within each country may shape political choices, as citizens respond to the social and economic consequences of prolonged instability. Technology and modern warfare capabilities add another layer of complexity to the situation. Cyber operations, satellite surveillance, and long-range precision weapons mean that conflicts today can unfold across multiple domains beyond traditional battlefields. Governments invest heavily in monitoring systems and intelligence networks to detect threats early and respond quickly to any potential escalation. These technological factors make modern conflicts both faster and more difficult to predict compared to wars in earlier decades. Because so many political, military, and economic variables are involved, analysts often describe the situation as highly fluid. Strategic decisions made by leaders in Tehran, Washington, D.C., and Tel Aviv could influence the direction of the crisis in ways that extend far beyond the immediate region. Governments, international observers, and security experts continue examining developments carefully, trying to understand how each new action might shape the evolving geopolitical landscape.